I was just having a discussion with some people online about the fact that Boxrec have got Chris Eubank Jr. listed as their #2 super middleweight in the world in their rankings. Now, I think Boxrec is an excellent website. It's a website I use all the time. It's probably the most impactful boxing website there's ever been because it has become a one-stop shop for boxing statistics. In years gone by before Boxrec, people relied on books to get fighters' records and statistics from. Whereas, as I say, Boxrec has become a one-stop shop for all that, and it has an advantage over books in that it can be updated constantly on the fly, whereas books can't. So I think Boxrec is an excellent site. It's a site I use all the time. It has stats for boxers and referees and shows and promoters and all kind of stuff, all kinds of information. It has bios on there, everything you could possibly want, or at least most of what you could possibly want. So it's an excellent website. But one critique I do have of Boxrec is their ranking system, because their ranking system is a computerized system. Now, you can criticize any rankings, but when it comes to a computerized system, it's inherently flawed. Why? Because numbers don't tell the full story. They just say this guy who was ranked at this beat this guy, and therefore his ranking goes up. It doesn't tell you about any circumstances in or around the fight or circumstances during the fight, which you might want to take into account before giving a guy whatever ranking afterwards. A good example of what I'm talking about is when Tony Bellew fought David Haye. David Haye had only lost 2 fights prior to losing to Tony Bellew. He'd knocked out Derek Chisora in 2012, taken a layoff, then he'd come back with 2 fights and got himself ranked with the major sanctioning bodies again. But when he went in the ring with Tony Bellew, we all know he was a badly injured fighter. That wasn't the same David Haye that fought Derek Chisora. But the numbers, the stats, they can't tell you that it wasn't the same David Haye. If Bellew had beaten the version of David Haye who beat Chisora, then people like me would have been far more impressed than we were. The fact is, he didn't beat that version. But the stats don't record that. The stats can't differentiate between whether this was the David Haye that beat Chisora or the David Haye that beat Jurjai and Mark Demore. They can't differentiate. You understand? That's why you can't rely on stats. The reality is it was a nice win for Bellew, but that was an injured Haye, a washed up Haye, a Haye with no timing, so on and so forth. That's the reality of it. And so most of us don't get too excited about Tony Bellew as a heavyweight, because we understand the David Haye that he beat was nothing like a prime Haye. And it takes observation of the fight, not stats, not numbers, observation of the fight to be able to see that. You're not going to get it from the stats. So that's just one example of why statistics should not be used to compile rankings. Or sorry, not solely used to compile rankings. You can use them to some extent, but with Boxrec, they literally type a bunch of numbers into a computer, hit enter, and it comes up with the fighter's rank. Stats maybe should be taken into account to a certain extent, but they should not be solely relied upon like they are with Boxrec. It's a flawed system. So I don't really take Boxrec ranking seriously. And nor should anybody else, you know, not to diss the website, because I think it's an excellent website. But yeah, with their rankings, it is what it is. Now, people criticize the rankings of sanctioning bodies because there's politics involved. But at least when it comes to human beings, they know when they're ranking somebody higher than they should be. They might put the guy there and whatever, because they got a good relationship with his promoter, but they know that it's some BS. Occasionally, you're going to see a top 10 WBC or IBF rankings which are justifiable, which are decent. Because at the end of the day, as I say, human beings know who should be where. You know, they know who should be where. I mean, there is some, you know, debate. There is a little bit of conjecture about exactly which position, but generally there's a consensus about who should at least be in the top 15 and who shouldn't be. Most of the fighters in a top 15 can be agreed upon. Where they fit into the top 15 is more where the debate comes in. But with Boxrec, it will sometimes list people in the top 10 or top 15 that should not be there. It doesn't take into account the quality of opposition that they've been fighting. Have they been fighting people with padded records? You know, did those people get their padded records by fighting guys who, you know, were injured, or guys who used to be champions that are coming back from long 2-3 year layoffs and they're not the same, you know, all that kind of stuff. I hope you get the point I'm making here. If you agree or disagree, drop your comments in the comment section below and let me know how you feel. All right, it's happening. I'm out.